All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the start of our final domestic macroeconomic goal for VC economics. We're going to be looking at the goal of full employment, specifically what the goal is and the types of unemployment that exist in this first lesson. Then in our next lesson, we're going to be looking at how unemployment is measured, a few of the different classifications of unemployment, and then after that, we'll be looking at recent aggregate demand, aggregate supply side factors that impact domestic macroeconomic goal, as well as how it's currently been trending and why that is the case. It's very interesting at the moment to look into this topic because we're just coming in a time where most government subsidies have ended. So JobKeeper, JobSeeker, etc. have all either reverted back to what they originally were or have just completely gone away, as well as the moratorium on rent evictions, etc., has stopped now that we've supposedly recovered from the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how the unemployment numbers change in the near future. So let's get into first up, talk about our overall what we'll be talking about. So today we're going to be looking at the meaning of the goal of full employment. We're not going to be looking at classifications. We're going to save that for next lesson, but the meaning of the goal of full employment is what we'll be looking at, as well as the types and causes of unemployment. So cyclical, structural, frictional, seasonal, hardcore unemployment we're talking all about. And then the consequences, this is essentially just how it links to living standards, which we'll look at briefly towards the end. All right, so to get into what the goal of full employment is, we need to first talk about what employment and unemployment are. So employment is when a person who is aged 15 years or older has a paid job and works for at least 1 hour per week. And that 1 hour per week is pretty important because that can make the numbers look a little bit distorted. So for example, we often brag when the unemployment numbers get around 5%, but if they fall to around 5%, because a lot of people get part-time work even though they want to work full-time, that's not necessarily a great thing, and it might not mean there's as much income coming into the economy as that may imply. And then, so for unemployment, it's those aged 15 and over who are actively looking for work and cannot find a job. One important thing there that we like to stipulate is that that doesn't include students. So partly because sometimes when VCAR gives or jerky teachers give numbers to calculate the unemployment rate in multiple choice, sometimes they'll have random other things in there like students, but students aren't included in the labour force as they are not technically actively looking for work and therefore they're not part of the labour force. That then gets us into the government's goal of full employment, which is the lowest rate of unemployment possible that will not cause inflation to accelerate, around 4.5 to 5% of the labour force. So you can stop the goals definition there, and that's 100% okay, because you've said there, and that'd be totally okay. You've said everything you need to say about what that goal is. So the lowest rate of unemployment possible that will not cause inflation to accelerate, around 4.5 to 5% of the labour force being naturally unemployed. So I'd stop at the naturally unemployed, up to you really, and what your teacher wants you to do. But the last little bit, mostly due to structural causes and other changes in supply side conditions, naturally unemployment implies that. That's what it's saying, that's what it refers to, but that's what the goal is. So the lowest rate of unemployment possible that will not cause inflation to accelerate, around 4.5 to 5% of the labour force would be naturally unemployed. So that gets us into our two main types of unemployment, which are important because one is aggregate demand side and one is aggregate supply side. So we have cyclical unemployment, which is the loss of jobs due to weak aggregate demand side conditions, lack of AD, and a downturn in economic activity or recession. This is essentially, it's called cyclical unemployment because it links into our business cycle. That if we looked at our business cycle and how it goes up and down over time, you would know from previous topics that when we are moving down in these areas, unemployment is rising, and when we are moving up into an expansion, unemployment is falling. That's essentially what it means by cyclical. It's going up and down in these cycles. So that is cyclical unemployment, exactly what's happening in that area. Then we've got natural unemployment. So natural unemployment is supply side. They say around 4.5 to 5% is unavoidable. There's always going to be a little bit of unemployment, even in a healthy economy. And this occurs due to the existence of structural, frictional, hardcore, and seasonal factors, which we will get into specifically right now. So these natural unemployment types, so our first natural form of unemployment, so these supply side factors, is structural unemployment. So structural change, which is when new technology makes Jobs obsolete, so people are replaced by technology, self-serve checkouts, things like that. Mismatched skills between unemployed people and available jobs. Businesses relocating or closing down. That's a lot of that's happened because of the pandemic. I was just in the Melbourne CBD a couple of days ago, and so many cafes, businesses have permanently closed due to the change in the structure of the world, and therefore they've closed because they're no longer profitable. Cost cutting and some government microeconomic reform policies. That's basically when government changes labor force rules, etc. There are frictional influences of unemployment. That's just the time when people are in between one job and starting the next. So if someone leaves their job and then starts, the time between that and when they start their other job, that's going to be frictional unemployment because just the time spent unemployed between those two things. There are seasonal factors, which is unemployment, which occurs at the same time each year. My favorite example for this is always just like shopping center Santas, because they only really have employment in December, because of other things like people who work in the mountains at the snow, people like lifeguards, people who are jobs that only exist at a certain time each year. Like, so I live in Bacchus Marsh. We are massive on strawberry farming here. And so only at certain times of the year do they need seasonal fruit pickers to pick those strawberries to be ready for the world. And then there are hardcore aspects, which is where personal characteristics make holding down a job difficult. This could just be someone's specific traits, if they're argumentative, etc., can make them very difficult to hold down a job, and therefore they may become unemployed more often because of it, and they might struggle to find another job, and that would make them hardcore unemployed. And then lastly, we have the impact of unemployment on living standards. So this is probably pretty common sense, but we've got 4 main points here. So unemployment lowers incomes and living standards. So obviously when people have less money, they are going to have less access to goods and services, less able to satisfy their needs and wants, and therefore they're going to have worse material and non-material living standards. They're probably going to be more stressed, all those kind of things. Unemployment lowers production levels and living standards. For the most part, when people are unemployed, we have a lower productive capacity, and therefore we can't produce as much, which lowers living standards, less access to goods and services. Unemployment slows the rate of inflation and living standards. That's because it decreases aggregate demand significantly, and therefore there's going to be less demand pressure on prices. And the government unemployment weakens government finances and living standards. It's because the government has to pay increased levels of welfare while receiving less tax revenue. And therefore that's going to weaken the government's financial situation and also be bad for living standards, as the government's less able to inject into the economy as well, because they've got less finances available, as well as people who are living on welfare. That's significantly less than the minimum wage and things like that, and therefore they're going to have worse living standards because of it. All right, so that is the end of this first lesson about the goal of full employment and types of unemployment: cyclical, natural, and then that natural unemployment is broken down into structural, frictional, seasonal, and hardcore unemployment. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to send me an email, leave a comment below. I just realized I'm wearing a t-shirt that kind of matches the template of this PowerPoint, which is very, very strange, but it also says "Oh Biscuits." If you need any economics resources, or you want to read a couple blogs about what's been happening in the world of economics that's relevant to VCE economics, head to therunningeconomy.com. Buy some resources if you're feeling like supporting me in some way. Or on that website as well, there's a link to a VCE economics Discord where a whole bunch, there's about 80 now, different students and teachers from all different schools have been helping each other out a whole lot, which has been amazing. All through this holidays, I've not been on it as much as I probably could have been, partly because I needed a break also, but there are students helping each other out, and there's some really, really high level economic advice and information questions. It's kind of great too, because you see questions from other schools, which you might not get to see otherwise. It's really going to broaden your horizons in terms of your economic knowledge. So hit that up, join, talk to other people. They all seem really friendly. Other than that, I hope you have had a wonderful break, and I will be back soon with more VC economics videos for the goal of full employment. Also, if you're not subscribing, subscribe to this. It makes my numbers look good, which will be good for things in future. Have a great day. Bye.